Come on, Nathaniel. 10 grand, says she, panics. One of the investors laughed softly over the sound of jazz and clinking crystal glasses, and Nathaniel Graves leaned back in his chair with the slow confidence of a man who had spent 20 years watching people fold under pressure. The private dining room glowed with warm amber light, reflecting against polished wine glasses and dark walnut walls, while rain streaked the massive windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Every table in the restaurant carried the same low hum of wealth. Expensive watches catching candlelight, quiet conversations worth millions, waiters moving like shadows between designer suits, and whispered negotiations. Nathaniel adjusted the cuff of his navy Brioni jacket and glanced toward the woman approaching their table. Claire Whitmore looked older than most servers in the restaurant. Early 40s maybe. Calm eyes. Soft brown hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. No heavy makeup. No nervous smile, trying too hard to please wealthy men. Just quiet professionalism wrapped in a cream-colored shirt and a black apron tied neatly at her waist. "Excuse me," she said gently, placing a fresh glass beside one of the Japanese executives. "Your bourbon, sir." Nathaniel barely looked at her before speaking. "Tell me something," he said loudly enough for the table to hear, amusement already creeping into his voice. "If you serve me in Japanese tonight, I'll tip you $10,000. A few men at the table chuckled immediately. One investor shook his head into his whiskey glass. Another muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. Nathaniel smiled wider. Relaxed. Entertained. Used to being the smartest man in every room. Claire didn't react at first. Her fingers tightened slightly around the silver tray, then relaxed again. "Would you prefer standard Japanese?" she asked quietly. "Or Kansai dialect?" The laughter stopped. Not slowly. Instantly. One of the executives from Osaka looked up so fast his reading glasses nearly slipped from his nose. Nathaniel blinked once. Just once. Claire turned toward the elderly Japanese chairman beside him and bowed politely. Then she spoke in flawless Japanese. Smooth, elegant, natural enough to sound lived in rather than memorized. The old chairman's expression changed completely. Surprise first. Then recognition. Then something deeper. Respect. Around them, forks paused halfway to plates. A bartender stopped drying a glass. Even the piano player near the bar missed a note. Nathaniel stared at her now. Really stared at her for the first time all evening. But Claire's face remained calm as still water. No arrogance. No performance. Just quiet precision. Then she looked directly at him and translated softly. "The chairman says your pronunciation earlier was slightly offensive, but he appreciates the effort." Silence spread across the restaurant like falling snow. Heavy, slow, unavoidable, and for the first time in years, Nathaniel Graves had absolutely no idea what to say. Nathaniel Graves had closed billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking once in his life, but somehow the quiet woman standing beside the candlelit table unsettled him more than any boardroom ever had. The Japanese chairman continued speaking to Claire with visible warmth now, his voice softer, almost nostalgic, while the other executives listened carefully. Nathaniel caught only fragments of the language, enough to realize the conversation had completely shifted away from him, away from his dinner. His fingers tapped once against the crystal whiskey glass before stopping entirely. Across the table, one of his investors leaned closer and whispered, "Who the hell is she?" Nobody answered. Claire translated another sentence calmly, her posture elegant despite the long shift that had already stretched nearly 11 hours. "Mr. Tanaka says the dialect reminds him of his hometown outside Osaka," she explained softly. "He says very few Americans speak it correctly anymore." Mr. Tanaka smiled at her with genuine surprise. "Especially not in New York City." Claire gave a small polite nod. "It has been many years." Nathaniel studied her more carefully now. There were details he had ignored earlier. The faint silver line of an old scar near her wrist. The exhaustion hidden beneath composed eyes. The way she carried herself with restraint instead of submission. Most servers in high-end restaurants moved quickly around wealthy clients, eager to please, eager for approval. Claire did not. She moved carefully, intentionally, like someone who had once belonged in rooms very different from this one. "You lived in Japan?" Nathaniel asked suddenly. Claire looked toward him for the first time since correcting his pronunciation. "For a while. That is all." His tone sharpened slightly. You do not just accidentally learn Japanese like that. One of the younger executives laughed nervously into his drink, sensing the tension building beneath Nathaniel's controlled voice. Claire remained calm. No, sir, she replied quietly. You do not. The answer landed harder than it should have. Short, simple, but somehow final. Nathaniel leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing with curiosity now instead of arrogance. Outside, the rain intensified against the towering glass windows, blurring Manhattan into rivers of gold and white light. Somewhere near the bar, the piano player resumed softly, hesitant at first. Claire adjusted the silver tray in her hands. Would anyone care for another pour before the main course arrives? The investors immediately looked toward Nathaniel before answering, an old habit around powerful men. But Nathaniel barely noticed them anymore. His attention stayed fixed on Claire as she moved around the table, refilling glasses with steady hands and quiet grace. Then Mr. Tanaka said something else in Japanese. Longer this time. Claire listened carefully before translating. He says your business proposal was impressive, she said to Nathaniel. But respect matters more than confidence in his culture. Silence returned again. Not awkward this time. Heavy. Honest. Nathaniel felt the words settle somewhere uncomfortable inside him, because for the first time that evening, he realized the old chairman was not really talking about business. The dinner should have recovered after that. Normally it would have. Wealthy men forgot uncomfortable moments quickly, especially inside restaurants where the lighting was soft enough to flatter their egos. But something had shifted at Nathaniel Graves' table, and everyone could feel it. The balance was wrong now. Uneven. Nathaniel loosened his grip around the whiskey glass and forced a controlled smile toward the chairman. I appreciate honesty, Mr. Tanaka, he said carefully. Claire translated with calm precision, her voice smooth enough to sound almost effortless. But the chairman answered before she finished, his English slower yet deliberate. Honesty is rare around rich men. One of the investors coughed awkwardly into his napkin. Another suddenly became very interested in the wine list. Nathaniel's jaw tightened for half a second before relaxing again. He had spent decades mastering composure in front of cameras, shareholders, politicians, competitors. Nobody survived his world without learning how to hide irritation behind charm. Yet somehow this waitress standing beside the table kept dismantling the atmosphere he controlled so naturally. Claire stepped back slightly as servers arrived carrying porcelain plates under warm golden light. Dry-aged steak. Black cod. Imported Wagyu flown in that morning from Tokyo. The scent of rosemary butter and grilled citrus filled the private room, while rain continued tapping softly against the windows 70 floors above Manhattan traffic. Your sea base, sir, Claire said quietly while setting a plate before Mr. Tanaka with practiced elegance. Then she paused. Just briefly. Her eyes flicked toward the chairman's chopsticks placement. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. What? He asked. Claire hesitated. Nothing important. Clearly it is. Her fingers rested lightly against the edge of the tablecloth. The chopsticks were placed vertically beside his plate. One investor frowned. So, Claire looked toward the chairman before speaking carefully. In Japanese culture, that placement resembles a funeral ritual. Silence again. Smaller this time, but sharper. One of the executives from Osaka immediately adjusted the chopsticks with visible embarrassment while apologizing rapidly in Japanese. Mr. Tanaka smiled gently toward Claire. You notice everything. Nathaniel stared at her. Not because of the correction itself, but because she had tried not to embarrass anyone. Most people in rooms like this rush to expose mistakes, to gain leverage, to look intelligent. Claire had instinctively protected the dignity of strangers instead. That unsettled him even more. Where did you learn all this? Nathaniel asked quietly. Claire kept her eyes lowered toward the table. Different life. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have tonight, sir. Her tone remained respectful, but final enough to stop further questions. For the next 20 minutes, the dinner continued, yet Nathaniel barely participated. Numbers were discussed. Expansion plans. Market projections. Artificial intelligence infrastructure across Asia. But his attention drifted constantly toward the woman moving silently between tables beneath the amber glow of hanging chandeliers. He watched how she spoke differently to every guest. Softer with older customers. More direct with impatient ones. Calm with everyone. There was no performance in it. No desperation to impress wealthy people. And that bothered him more than arrogance ever could. Then, as Claire passed beside his chair once more, Nathaniel spoke without thinking. You do realize $10,000 is still yours. Claire stopped beside him. Her expression never changed. No, sir, she said softly. Respect should not have a price tag. And somehow those 7 words hit harder than every business negotiation Nathaniel Graves had survived in the last 20 years. By the time dessert arrived, the energy inside the private dining room had changed completely. Earlier that night, Nathaniel Graves had been the gravitational center of the table. Every investor watched his reactions before speaking. Every executive measured their tone against his mood. But now the attention drifted somewhere else entirely, toward the quiet waitress who moved through the room with unsettling composure. Claire carried a tray of espresso cups beneath the warm amber lights, while soft piano music floated across the restaurant again. Her movements remained steady despite the pressure surrounding Nathaniel's table. She did not rush. She did not linger. She simply worked with the calm precision of someone who refused to be intimidated by wealth. Nathaniel noticed every detail. Now, the faint crease of exhaustion near her eyes. The way she instinctively straightened a misplaced napkin before anyone noticed it. The habit she had of pausing half a second before answering personal questions. None of it matched the image of an ordinary server. Mr. Graves. One of the younger analysts leaned toward him quietly. The chairman seems far more comfortable now. Nathaniel's eyes remained fixed on Claire as she translated another short exchange between Mr. Tanaka and one of the restaurant managers. I noticed. Honestly, the analyst muttered carefully, I think she saved the evening. Nathaniel said nothing. Because the truth irritated him. She had saved the evening. Not with charm. Not with manipulation. Just competence. Pure effortless competence. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka suddenly spoke again in Japanese while holding his espresso cup delicately between both hands. Claire listened closely before her expression shifted almost invisibly. Nathaniel caught it immediately. What did he say? He asked. Claire hesitated. He was complimenting the hospitality. Mr. Tanaka smiled knowingly over the rim of his cup. Translate correctly. A faint tension entered the air. Claire lowered her eyes briefly before speaking. He said he was reconsidering whether your company understands Japanese partnerships deeply enough for long-term trust. Silence. One investor slowly set down his fork. Another stared directly at the tablecloth. Nathaniel's face remained calm, but the muscles along his jaw tightened sharply beneath the restaurant lighting. Because of me, he said quietly. It was not a question. Claire answered carefully. First impressions matter in his culture. The words should have sounded critical. Somehow they did not. That only made them worse. Nathaniel exhaled slowly through his nose and leaned back into the leather chair. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Manhattan, while headlights blurred below through rain-soaked glass. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar creeping beneath his perfectly controlled exterior. Not anger, not embarrassment, something heavier. The realization that money had protected him from consequences for so long. He had forgotten how often people lied to powerful men just to keep them comfortable. But Claire had not lied. Not once. Mr. Tanaka stood slowly from the table, and every executive immediately followed. The old chairman adjusted his dark gray suit before bowing politely toward Claire first. Nathaniel noticed that immediately. Thank you for preserving the dignity of tonight, the chairman said softly in English. Claire looked genuinely uncomfortable receiving the attention. You are very kind, sir. Then the chairman turned toward Nathaniel. A strong company can impress people, he said quietly. But character is what keeps them. The room fell silent again. Nathaniel watched Claire lower her gaze modestly, as if she wanted no credit at all, and somehow that affected him more than any insult could have. Because people who chase power usually make noise when they win. Claire Whitmore did not. She simply carried the empty espresso cups toward the kitchen, and left a billionaire sitting speechless beneath the golden lights of his own dinner. The dinner ended just after 10:30, but Nathaniel Graves remained seated long after the investors disappeared into the private elevator with polite handshakes and strained smiles. Rain still crawled down the towering windows in silver streams, while Manhattan shimmered below like a restless ocean of light. The restaurant had quieted now. Fewer conversations. Softer music. The late-night crowd carried a different energy than the wealthy executives from earlier. Couples leaning close over candlelight. Tourists taking blurry photographs near the skyline view. Servers moving slower after long shifts on tired feet. Nathaniel loosened his tie slightly and stared at the untouched second glass of whiskey beside his hand. He could still hear Mr. Tanaka's words repeating in his mind. Character is what keeps them. Strange how one sentence from an elderly businessman had unsettled him more than stock crashes, lawsuits, or hostile negotiations ever could. Across the dining room, Claire Whitmore quietly wiped down a nearby table beneath warm golden lighting. No audience now. No executives watching her. No reason to maintain appearances. Yet she moved with the same care she had shown all evening. Folding napkins neatly. Aligning silverware. Straightening chairs with tired but steady hands. Nathaniel watched her for nearly a minute before finally standing. Claire. She looked up slowly. Calm as always. Yes, sir. Stop calling me sir. The answer came before he could reconsider it. Claire tilted her head slightly, almost amused. You are still technically a customer. Nathaniel, then. She studied him quietly for a moment as thunder rolled faintly beyond the glass skyline. All right, Nathaniel. Hearing his first name in her voice felt strangely unfamiliar. Softer than he expected. Human. Nathaniel stepped closer to the empty table she was cleaning. How long did you live in Japan? Claire continued folding a linen napkin carefully before answering. Almost 8 years. Doing what? Her hands paused for half a second. Translating. For who? Different companies. Short answers again. Precise. Controlled. Nathaniel exhaled softly through his nose. You avoid personal questions professionally. Experience teaches people things. And what exactly did experience teach you? Claire finally looked directly at him. The restaurant lights reflected faintly in her gray-blue eyes. But there was exhaustion there now, too. Real exhaustion. That powerful men usually ask questions because they want control, she said quietly. Not understanding. The words landed cleanly between them. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. Nathaniel should have felt irritated. Instead, he felt exposed. Around them, servers carried trays toward the kitchen while muted jazz drifted through the nearly empty restaurant. Somewhere near the bar, a dishwasher laughed loudly before the sound disappeared again beneath soft piano notes. Claire picked up another wine glass carefully. You should go home, she said gently. You have another meeting tomorrow morning at 8. Nathaniel frowned slightly. How do you know that? You repeated it 3 times during dinner. A faint, almost invisible smile touched her expression. You also rescheduled Chicago twice while pretending not to look stressed. Nathaniel stared at her for a second before a quiet laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Real this time. Not polished. Not strategic. Claire looked surprised by the sound herself. Then silence settled comfortably between them for the first time all evening. Nathaniel glanced toward the rain beyond the windows before speaking again, quieter now. You saw through me pretty quickly tonight. Claire lowered her eyes toward the wine glass in her hand. No, she said softly. I think you are just tired of pretending people cannot. Nathaniel should have left after that conversation. Any other night, he would have. His driver was already waiting downstairs beside a black Rolls-Royce glistening beneath cold rain and Manhattan streetlights. Tomorrow's schedule was packed from sunrise until midnight. Investors in Chicago. A conference call with Singapore. A television interview before lunch. His life moved by calendars, negotiations, and numbers too large for ordinary people to imagine. But somehow, he remained standing inside the quiet restaurant watching Claire Whitmore polish wine glasses beneath soft golden light like the rest of the world no longer mattered. You are staring again, Claire said without looking up. Nathaniel almost smiled. You notice everything. Occupational hazard. She placed another clean glass carefully onto the shelf behind the bar. Midnight was approaching now, and the restaurant had nearly emptied completely. Chairs were being turned upside down onto tables in the far dining room, while tired employees exchanged quiet goodnights near the kitchen doors. Outside, the storm had softened into steady rain that painted silver streaks across the windows overlooking Park Avenue. Nathaniel loosened his jacket and sat down at the empty bar counter instead of leaving. Claire glanced toward him briefly. Most billionaires do not stay after closing. Most waitresses do not speak Japanese better than executives from Tokyo. Her hands paused for the smallest moment. Fair point. Nathaniel studied her carefully again beneath the warm backlighting above the shelves of crystal bottles and imported whiskey. She looked different now without the pressure of the dinner crowd around her. More tired, more real. There was no performance left in either of them tonight. Just two people unexpectedly stranded inside a conversation neither seemed ready to end. "What made you leave?" he asked quietly. Claire continued, drawing another glass. "Japan. The corporate world. The life before this." Silence stretched between them for several seconds while soft jazz drifted through nearly empty space. Finally, Claire spoke. "My younger brother got sick." Nathaniel's expression changed instantly. Claire kept her eyes on the glass in her hands. "Cancer," she said softly. "I spent almost 2 years flying between hospitals and translation contracts trying to keep him alive." Nathaniel said nothing. For once, no clever response came to him. Claire exhaled carefully before continuing. "By the time he passed away, I realized I did not recognize myself anymore." Her voice never cracked. That somehow made the words heavier. Everything in that world became transactions. Meetings, flights, deadlines. People pretending work mattered more than life. Nathaniel looked down at the untouched espresso sitting near his hand. "And now you work 16-hour shifts in Manhattan." Claire gave a faint, tired smile. "This feels more honest." The answer settled heavily between them. Somewhere near the kitchen, an employee switched off another row of lights, darkening half the restaurant. The skyline outside glowed colder, now beneath the rain-soaked night. Nathaniel watched Claire carefully as she folded a white towel with practiced precision. "You know," he said slowly, "most people spend their lives trying to escape jobs like this." Claire finally looked directly at him again. Calm, steady. "Most people also spend their lives chasing rooms full of strangers who only respect their money." Nathaniel felt that one land deeper than he expected. Claire lowered her eyes again and spoke almost gently this time. "I think losing someone changes what impresses you." Silence followed, long enough for Nathaniel to hear the rain against glass and the quiet exhaustion in his own breathing. And for the first time in many years, the billionaire who could buy almost anything in Manhattan realized he had absolutely no idea how to answer a woman who valued peace more than power. The rain had finally stopped by the time Claire stepped out of the restaurant just after 1 in the morning. Manhattan breathed differently at that hour. Slower, colder. Steam curled from subway grates beneath pale streetlights, while distant sirens echoed somewhere far downtown like fading memories. Claire pulled her charcoal coat tighter around herself and started walking toward Lexington Avenue with tired, measured steps, her black work shoes tapping softly against wet pavement. Behind her, the restaurant lights dimmed one by one. Another shift finished. Another night survived quietly. "Claire." Nathaniel's voice reached her before the sound of his footsteps did. She stopped beneath the glow of a traffic light, but did not turn immediately. When she finally looked back, he stood several feet away beside the curb, one hand resting loosely in his coat pocket, while rainwater still glimmered on the shoulders of his navy jacket. The black Rolls-Royce waited silently behind him, with headlights cutting pale ribbons through the misty street. "You are still here," she said softly. Nathaniel gave a faint, humorless smile. Apparently. Claire studied him carefully. Most wealthy men she had known in her old life hated discomfort. They escaped silence quickly. They filled empty space with meetings, noise, money, anything to avoid sitting alone with themselves. Yet Nathaniel Graves kept lingering around conversations that made him uncomfortable, that interested her more than she wanted to admit. "Your driver looks concerned," she said quietly. Nathaniel glanced briefly toward the waiting car where his driver immediately pretended not to notice them. "He thinks I am having a midlife crisis." A soft laugh escaped Claire before she could stop it. Real this time, warm enough to surprise both of them. Nathaniel looked at her differently after that laugh. Less like a puzzle, more like a person. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Claire hesitated briefly before nodding once. Nathaniel's expression shifted slightly beneath the cold white glow of the streetlights. More serious now. "When you looked at me tonight, before all this changed," he paused carefully. "What did you honestly think?" Claire lowered her eyes toward the wet pavement for a second. Traffic hissed quietly through nearby intersections while the city moved around them in distant, blurred motion. Finally, she answered, "I thought you were lonely." Nathaniel blinked once. The answer hit him harder than criticism ever could have. Claire spoke gently, without cruelty. Not because you are rich, she continued quietly. Because everyone around you watches your money before they watch your face. Neither of them spoke after that. A freezing wind drifted through the avenue, carrying the smell of rain and distant coffee carts preparing for early morning commuters. Nathaniel stared toward the glowing skyline for several seconds before exhaling slowly. You know what is strange, he said. I spend my entire life surrounded by people. Claire looked at him calmly. That is not the same thing as being seen. Silence again, but softer now. The kind that settles between two exhausted people who accidentally stopped pretending around each other. Nathaniel glanced toward her worn black shoes, the tired posture hidden beneath dignity, the quiet strength she carried without demanding attention from anyone. You could have embarrassed me tonight, he said quietly. A lot worse than you did. Claire shook her head once. Humiliating people does not heal anything. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment beneath the pale Manhattan lights. Then he smiled faintly, smaller than before. Realer somehow. You really are different. Claire slipped her hands into her coat pockets against the cold. No, she said softly. I think most people start this way. She looked toward the sleeping city beyond them. Life just teaches them to become louder. 3 days later, Nathaniel Graves stood inside the 42nd floor conference suite of Graves International, staring through glass walls at a gray Manhattan morning while tension quietly spread across the room like smoke. The final partnership meeting with Tanaka Holdings had begun an hour earlier, and everything was going wrong. Assistants moved quickly. Around polished marble tables carrying coffee no one touched, while expensive leather folders remained unopened in front of increasingly frustrated executives. Nathaniel loosened his cufflinks slightly, a habit he only had when pressure started breaking through his calm exterior. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka sat silently beside two senior advisors, his expression unreadable beneath the cold white light pouring through the skyscraper windows. The atmosphere felt completely different from the restaurant. There was no jazz here. No candlelight softening people into humanity. Only corporate glass, numbers, and exhaustion. We believe the expansion timeline is still realistic, one of Nathaniel's board members insisted carefully while flipping through presentation slides. One of the Japanese advisors exchanged a glance with Mr. Tanaka before replying sharply in Japanese. Nathaniel recognized the tone immediately, even if he could not fully understand the words. Disappointment. Doubt. The room tightened. What did he say? Nathaniel asked quietly to his translator. The young interpreter hesitated too long. A mistake. Nathaniel saw it immediately. Then the translator answered with overly polished corporate language that sounded safe instead of truthful. Mr. Tanaka's expression hardened almost invisibly. Nathaniel felt it happen. The trust inside the room dropping inch by inch. Suddenly, he remembered Claire's voice from the restaurant. Respect matters more than confidence. He exhaled slowly, then made a decision that surprised even himself. Pause the meeting for 10 minutes, he said firmly. Confused executives looked toward him immediately. Nathaniel, one board member whispered sharply. We cannot afford delays right now. Nathaniel ignored him completely and stepped away from the table, already pulling out his phone. 20 minutes later, the conference room doors opened again. Every executive looked up. Claire Whitmore stepped quietly inside wearing a dark charcoal coat over a simple navy sweater, her hair tied back loosely exactly as it had been that rainy night at the restaurant. She looked completely out of place among billion-dollar negotiations and polished corporate tension, yet somehow calmer than everyone else in the room combined. Nathaniel walked toward her before anyone could speak. Thank you for coming. Claire glanced around carefully at the frozen executives staring at her. This feels like a terrible idea, she murmured softly. Probably, Nathaniel admitted. Then Mr. Tanaka slowly stood from his chair. His tired face changed the moment he recognized her. Genuine warmth replaced tension instantly. He bowed respectfully. Miss Whitmore. Claire bowed politely in return. Around the room, confusion spread visibly across Nathaniel's board members. One executive leaned toward another whispering, "That is the waitress?" Nathaniel heard it clearly. So did Claire. But she ignored it completely. Mr. Tanaka spoke quietly in Japanese, much faster this time, frustration finally surfacing openly in his voice. Claire listened without interrupting once. Then she translated calmly for Nathaniel. He says your company prepared impressive numbers, she explained softly. But every answer today sounded rehearsed instead of honest. Silence filled the conference suite. Sharp, uncomfortable, real. Claire continued carefully. He believes your team is trying to win the contract. She paused briefly before looking directly at Nathaniel. Instead of trying to understand the people offering it, the words landed heavily across the room. Nathaniel looked around at his executives, their expensive suits, their prepared presentations, their carefully engineered confidence. Then back at Claire standing quietly beneath cold morning light with no interest in power at all. And somehow, she was the only person in the building actually making the room feel human again. The conference room remained silent long after Claire finished speaking. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for their laptops or expensive presentations anymore. Morning light spilled across the glass walls of Graves International, cold and pale against polished marble floors, while Manhattan stretched endlessly beneath the skyscraper windows like a city too busy to notice lives changing inside one quiet room. Nathaniel Graves stood completely still beside the conference table, his hands resting lightly against the back of a leather chair as Claire's words settled deeper into the room than any financial projection ever had. Around him, executives avoided eye contact for the first time all morning, because deep down, they knew she was right. They had spent months studying profit margins, infrastructure costs, and expansion strategy, but not one of them had truly studied the people sitting across the table. Mr. Tanaka slowly removed his glasses and folded them carefully in front of him. Then he looked directly at Nathaniel. "Business becomes dangerous," the chairman said quietly in English, "when people forget they are speaking to human beings instead of opportunities." Nathaniel lowered his eyes briefly. A younger version of himself would have defended the company immediately, explained the pressure, the scale, the responsibility. But something about Claire standing quietly near the windows changed that instinct completely. For once, he stopped trying to win. "You are right," Nathaniel admitted softly. The room froze again. One executive nearly looked shocked hearing the words come out of his mouth. Nathaniel exhaled carefully before continuing. "I built this company believing confidence solved everything." His voice remained calm, but quieter now, more honest. Maybe somewhere along the way, I stopped listening. No rehearsed corporate tone, no strategic language, just truth. Claire watched him silently from across the room, her expression unreadable beneath the soft gray daylight. Then something remarkable happened. Mr. Tanaka smiled. Small, genuine. "Now," the chairman said gently, "we can begin talking honestly." The tension inside the room dissolved almost instantly after that. Conversations became slower, more human. Executives stopped performing and started listening. Questions replaced speeches. By noon, the partnership agreement was signed quietly without celebration or ego, just mutual respect. Hours later, Claire stepped out of the Graves International building into crisp afternoon sunlight, pulling her coat tighter against the October wind. Yellow taxis rolled endlessly through Midtown while people rushed past carrying coffee cups and deadlines and private worries no one else could see. Behind her, the revolving doors opened again. Nathaniel walked outside alone this time. No assistants, no board members, just him. Claire glanced back calmly. "Congratulations," she said softly. Nathaniel looked toward the busy streets before answering. "You saved the deal." Claire shook her head once. No, her voice remained gentle. "I think honesty did." Nathaniel smiled faintly at that. Then he reached into his coat pocket and held out a folded envelope. Claire frowned slightly. "What is that?" "Your $10,000. She stared at the envelope for a second before pushing it gently back toward him. "I told you before," she said quietly. "Respect should not have a price tag." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment beneath the bright Manhattan sky. Then slowly, he lowered the envelope again. For the first time in years, nobody around him was impressed by his money. And strangely, that felt more valuable than anything he could have purchased. Claire stepped backward toward the crowded sidewalk, ready to disappear back into ordinary life without asking for recognition from anyone. Nathaniel watched her go quietly, understanding something now that success had never taught him. The loudest people in the room are not always the strongest. Sometimes, the people who change your life speak the softest. And maybe that is why the quiet ones are never truly ordinary. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your perspective in just one conversation? Or have you ever been underestimated because of your job, appearance, or background? Leave a comment and share your story.